Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular evening council meeting of Monday, November the 22nd. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Members of the public may access the meeting or participate in the following ways. Attend council chambers in person. Individuals who wish to attend council chambers in person may do so by registering in advance of the meeting by contacting the corporate officer at summerland.ca to ensure there is enough space in council chambers. Watch the meeting live or recorded at the District of Summerland YouTube channel, youtube.com District of Summerland. Those who have not registered in advance but wish to speak during the public comment opportunities may be given the opportunity, time permitting. After I have provided everyone who has pre-registered with an opportunity to comment, the floor will be open to those in council chambers and those on the conference line. The conference line can be accessed by dialing 778-907-2071 and entering meeting ID 506-489-9374 and passcode 485186. Kendra, you have a late item to introduce?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So there will be two late items. The first is the consideration of holding the December 13th, 2021 public hearing and regular evening council meeting at the Summerland Arena Banquet Room to be added on as 9.4. And the second is the confirmation of the preferred sites for the primary healthcare feasibility study as discussed at the November 22nd, 2021 Committee of the Whole, added as item 11.1.
Oh. Okay, thank you. Will someone bring forward adoption of the agenda as amended, please? Councillor Holmes, Councillor Barkwell, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And adoption of the November 8th meeting minutes. That was the evening meeting. Anyone? Councillor Barkwell and Councillor Traynor, all in favor? Thanks. And now on to my mayor's report. On November 9th, Council had a meeting to continue budget discussions following the Q3 updates from department heads at our November 8th regular afternoon Council meeting. November 11th, I attended the Remembrance Day ceremony outside the Legion and laid a wreath at the base of the flagpole after saying a few words honoring those men and women and their families for their service, both those who came home and those who lost their lives. My thanks to the Legion for organizing and hosting this short ceremony. I was invited to present on November 12th to the newcomer community working with South Okanagan-Similkameen Community Services, that's SOEX. I spoke to participants about my path to the mayor's seat, the role and responsibilities of the mayor and of councillors, and the local government election process before an interesting Q&A session. Monday, November 15th was a full-day meeting of the Climate Solutions Council. It was the end of the term for many people on the council, and for some, the first time we met in person. Due to other commitments, I decided late Friday that I would not attend the Vancouver meeting in person, and as it turns out, that was a good decision. Would have been stranded. On November 16th, CAO Graham Stadd and I had a virtual meeting with MP Dan Elbis to bring him up to date on ongoing and upcoming projects as the House begins the fall session today. Later that day, I attended the open house on the proposed new Recreation and Fitness Center and the Summerland Community Arts Council board meeting. One of the council's priorities is to build relationships between council and the Penticton Indian Band Council and between council and the School District 67 board. This month, CAO Stat and I have had meetings with Chief Gabriel and their Natural Resources Manager, and this morning with School District 67 Board Chair James Pelanio, Superintendent of Schools Todd Manuel, and their consultant. The school district is undertaking a long-range facilities plan review and is asking for feedback from Summerland parents of school-aged children. Access the community survey on their website at sd67.bc.ca or on the district's Facebook page. The survey is open until November 29th. The CAO and I had a meeting on Thursday with Ministers Farnworth, Fleming, Osborne, Popham, EMBC, and ministerial staff to hear updates on the actions being taken on rescue efforts, financial relief, and other measures being taken following last week's extreme weather events. And of course, that's an ongoing process. I'd like to end tonight with a notice that, at the request of Princeton Mayor Spencer Coyne, the Community Foundation of the South Okanagan has set up a Princeton Relief Fund to help the recovery effort. CFSO is taking donations and administering the funds. I spoke to Mayor Coyne on Thursday. He is worried that this week's forecasted heavy rain for the region will make a challenging situation even more difficult for Princeton residents. That's all. CAO stat.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to begin my report today by recognizing the tremendous work of our fellow staff in nearby municipalities affected by the flooding and mudslides in the recent weeks. Our thoughts are with those public servants who are working long hours to restore key services and utilities for their communities. On Tuesday, November 16th, we provided 3 firefighters to help unload 40 evacuees who had been repositioned from a Princeton area interior healthcare home. It took about 1.5 hours to unload all the occupants. Our Summerland Emergency Support Services Director, Bonnie Bordas, has also stepped up as a ESS branch coordinator to support a coordinated effort with ESS in the RDOS area. Staff in the water utility have done a thorough review of our dams and reservoirs in the watershed, and I am glad to report there's no damage or concerns at this time. The base phones for the district hall and other locations were impacted by the flooding, and we appreciate the patience of residents who struggled to get a hold of staff in the last week. The impact was limited to those calls originating from a TELUS or Bell landline or mobility device, as those providers had their infrastructure damaged in the floods. We have resolved most of the issues now, but there remains intermittent issues. As a result, we have implemented a temporary number that citizens can use when the district main line is not working for them. That number is 778-300-2131, and when it is used, the call be redirected through other channels to the district. Recycle BC has notified us that starting today, they are suspending the collection of glass and foam packaging from Recycle BC depots, including the one located at our sanitary landfill. The reason for the suspension is because transportation corridors are compromised due to road closures, and they cannot move the materials from the receiving facilities to their end markets. In fact, they noted to us that their primary glass end market is currently underwater, and they are unable to provide a specific timeline when the collection will resume. We are asking residents to store the materials in such a time as recycling services will restart, as we do not have space on site. We have informed residents of the changes using Facebook, sandwich boards at the landfill in downtown, as well as posting the information on our website under community alerts. Under the theme of emergency preparedness, I did want to take a moment to recognize the efforts of our electric utility crews who have maintained vigilance in our power line brushing program the last few years. Even with the high winds that were associated with the storms in recent weeks, we did not experience any power outages in the district. Community engagement is currently underway until November 29th to gather input on the Recreation Center feasibility study. We are looking for what site the community prefers for the potential replacement of the Summerland Aquatic and Fitness Center. Folks are encouraged to view the display boards and complete the survey available online or at the Aquatic Center Arena or District Hall. Finally, I wanted to note that we are receiving many compliments on Council's decision to provide a temporary dog park in Dale Meadows. You have probably noticed the high usage of the location. In fact, when I took Chewy and Paco there the other day, there were 8 other dogs in the space beside them. We continue to gather comments and will report back to council in January as part of the Q4 reporting process. One change has been to have the gate close at 5 p.m. instead of dusk, a term that is open to some interpretation and was causing confusion. We also have received a recent suggestion by a group representing small dogs to have a couple times each week when the park will be limited for an hour or two to smaller dogs who can sometimes be intimidated by larger dogs in the same space. It's something we're looking at and provide more information once we've had time to consider that further. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Graham. Any questions of either of our reports? Councillor Holmes.
I have lots of questions about Chewy, but maybe I'll take that offline.
With Ranger, and everyone knows how big Ranger is, he doesn't like small dogs, not the other way around. Okay. Is there anyone on the line or that has registered to speak? No. Okay. So moving on to development reports, 9.1, zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2021-044, 10907 Prairie Valley Road. Joanne.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of the zoning amendment bylaw number 2021-044 is to change the zoning designation of the subject property at 10907 Prairie Valley Road from residential medium lot, RSD1, to residential duplex housing, RDH. So the property is approximately 814 square meters and currently contains a single detached dwelling. And the property fronts immediately onto Prairie Valley Road and is currently accessed by a single driveway. The proposed RDH zone would allow for construction of a duplex building and accessory building. The applicant has provided conceptual plans for a side-by-side duplex with a shared accessory building in the rear and 3 parking stalls for each unit. The subject property is currently designated as low-density residential in the official community plan, and the low-density residential designation has a typical density range of 4 to 22 units per hectare, and it's meant to accommodate either single detached housing or duplex housing. And it is the only residential designation in our OCP that contemplates a standalone duplex. Within the policies for residential development in the OCP, there is encouragement to ensure that there's a range of housing types and choice is provided to meet market demands and to ensure that there are more affordable options that can increase density while providing a livable design. Policies are also to ensure that development is located where it can be efficiently serviced, like in an area like Prairie Valley Road, where there are existing district services. This property is also within the urban growth area identified in the official community plan as a place for infill and intensification. The urban growth area is essentially where we want to be directing growth so that densification can occur to support efficient servicing and to create a complete community where housing has pedestrian connections to amenities and services. It also encourages diverse housing opportunities to be provided within this area. And in this case, this development is located within walking distance to the downtown and a school and is already serviced. So this is the existing zoning bylaw map. So as you can see, most of the surrounding area is RSD1, with the exception of a few higher density parcels that are shown in brown. There's also Giants Head School to the east, shown in teal, and a community home care facility to the southwest, which is also shown in teal. So the proposed zone would introduce a duplex use in a primarily single-family area. Just in comparison, comparing the proposed RDH zone, I've highlighted the use and the regulation differences between the two zones. So as you can see, the RDH zone allows for a duplex in addition to the uses that are already allowed in the RSD1 zone. And it has a slightly higher floor area ratio and different subdivision requirements. However, the lot coverage, setbacks, maximum height provisions are unchanged between the two zones. So the siding and built form that's allowed between the two would remain unchanged. So the conceptual plans show for a duplex building facing Prairie Valley Road with one driveway per unit and one parking stall in front of each of the units. So it is just noted on that plan that the driveway widths are too narrow to meet the driveway bylaw as shown on the plans. And they require an additional approximately 1 foot 10 inches to comply with the minimum driveway width. But overall, the concept plan demonstrates the feasibility of being able to construct a duplex on the parcel, provided that minor adjustments are made to either the design or a variance is sought. So this slide just shows the conceptual design of the duplex fronting Prairie Valley Road. And this shows the site plan at the rear, showing the two parking stalls, one within the proposed garage area and one to the side. And then this slide just simply shows the building elevation for the accessory building. That would be at the rear of the property with garages below and a loft area on top. And it's noted that a separate variance application would be required in order to construct this because only a one-story building would be permitted under the proposed zoning. So this comparison table just shows the proposed zone in relation to the conceptual plans. So highlighted there would be the maximum height for the accessory building exceeding the one-story and 4.5 meter maximum, which would require a variance under a separate application. And then also the minimum lot area and minimum lot width requirements. So this would be a slightly under sized parcel for a duplex. However, the duplex could be built. However, either a variance would be required for a subdivision, or it could just remain as a duplex on a single lot. So we did receive internal comments outlining future servicing requirements and building permit requirements. Of some concern was Public Works and Engineering noting that additional driveway letdowns do increase pedestrian and cycling risks. So an additional driveway would mean an additional letdown, which would break up the sidewalk flow along Prairie Valley Road. So the Advisory Planning Commission reviewed this proposal and provided generally supportive comments for a duplex and densification in the area. However, there was concern about the potential for a fourplex or a duplex with suites. And there was also concern, although it was acknowledged that it's out of the scope of the APC's realm, about the appropriateness of the variance request for the additional building height of the accessory building. They were also supportive of the applicant clarifying their intentions of providing suites in the basement. So the APC resolved to recommend that the rezoning be supported by council and that the APC supported the planning department working with the applicant to clarify their proposal for the additional suites or to ensure that the proposal did not include additional suites to comply with the proposed RDH zone. So after the APC meeting, the applicant was contacted and they clarified that they did not wish to pursue suites, and they revised their conceptual plans to show an unfinished basement. And the applicant is aware that the suites are not allowed in duplexes, and the applicant wanted to keep the application to allow for a duplex only, not for a duplex with suites or a fourplex. So in favor of the application, this rezoning is an infill development within an urban growth area. It's close to amenities like a school and downtown with servicing available. And it's redeveloping land that is outside of environmentally sensitive areas and that has connectivity to the downtown. It's also allowing for greater flexibility of housing type by allowing either a duplex or single detached dwelling to be constructed on this site. This is seen as diversifying housing options while keeping within the same built form parameters of what is allowed on neighboring properties. Although the design needs modifications or variances, none of these variances are seen as a limiting factor in the ability to reasonably develop the site for duplex. So it is staff's recommendation that the zoning amendment bylaw be given first and second reading and that a public hearing be scheduled to receive public feedback. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Joanne. Council, do you have questions? Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you tell me, before this goes to public hearing, is the accessory building going to be revised to indicate that it will be a garage and not a garage with a loft? Sure looks like a carriage house. And I don't believe the zone will allow for a carriage house on a duplex zone.
Yes, so the floor plans show the second floor being an open area with a small bathroom, but no indication of a kitchen or any living facilities.
Other questions? I have a couple, Joanne. It says in the report that there is a known high water in that area. I'm wondering, and that there are basements allowed there. I'm wondering if there's a bit of a disconnect there and if there's a way of, minimizing the potential impact of water in the basement. Like, could it be a crawl space like they have in Trout Creek?
Maybe I'll take that one. Thanks,
Okay.
Mayor, for the question. Definitely there would be options in the building permit stage for how they're wanting to construct the building. There could be a waterproofing that occurs of the basement to deal with the high water table. Right now, the plans that are shown are conceptual and just for the purpose of going through the rezoning. And there probably would be more engagement with both our engineering and public works as well as the building department on their requirements to install a basement, knowing that it's a high water table area.
Thank you. It's like to fend off that problem before it's in place. My second question has to do with the driveways. There's dual driveway access, and notice in the report again that there are internal comments about the driveway being less than the standard width. I'm wondering if this, well, two things. I thought that the driveway bylaw that we just passed restricted having two entrances to the same lot. Am I incorrect there?
Thanks, Your Worship, for the question. It wouldn't apply to a duplex if there's two individual units. It would apply if it was a single-family house that was being constructed, which that would still be, even if this zoning goes forward, it could be an option still to have a single-family house on the property with this zoning. The driveway access bylaw would allow for two accesses. Now, it would still potentially trigger a variance, though, due to the minimum width requirement.
That was my next question, and that's once the zoning is in place.
Yeah.
Okay, before the building permit is issued. That's when the variance comes forward?
Well, there would still be an opportunity for the applicant to consider a design change, potentially to accommodate that regulation, but if not, then there would be a variance that would be required prior to building permit being issued.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have questions? Councillor Van Elfen.
I'll bring the resolution forward, Madam Mayor. That zoning bylaw amendment 10907 Prairie Valley Road bylaw number 2021-044 be read a first, a second time, and that the public hearing be held on December 13th, 2021 to receive public feedback on zoning bylaw amendment 10907 Prairie Valley Road bylaw number 2021-044.
Thank you, Councillor Barkwell. Seconder? Councillor Holmes. And discussion? Pretty pleased to see another infill with, close to town and has the services. Okay, all in favor? Great, that's unanimous. Joanne, 9.2 is yours as well, short-term rental survey results.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of this presentation and the associated report is to present the results of our public engagement efforts for the short-term rentals project. So just to provide some context on the project to trigger your memory before I summarize and go into the details on our findings, I'll just provide a quick reminder as to where we're at with the short-term rentals. So as council is aware, the approach for the short-term rentals project was discussed at the August 23rd council meeting and directed staff to draft a regulatory framework that was permissive like the city of Penticton's, and also to initiate public engagement to get feedback on this approach. So in response to that, in September, we launched the project with a webpage on the district's website, and then shortly after that, we launched a survey that ran for a month and held an electronic open house. So to get the word out on these events and the survey, we advertised in the newspaper and in the September and October editions of the utility bill newsletter. We also highlighted the short-term rentals page on the main page of the district's website. We posted on social media, and then we also did a mailed flyer directly to residents, inviting them to participate. So in terms of the draft regulations, in terms of what we were presenting to the public, to keep it simple, didn't get into drafting the actual zoning amendments and other bylaw amendments, but just presented a simple draft framework that summarized as essentially allowing short-term rentals in all urban residential, rural residential, and commercial zones that allow for dwellings, allowing them in all types of dwellings, allowing them year-round, limiting the maximum occupancy to 6 without further public consultation, limiting the number of rentals to one per property when you have a situation of a single detached dwelling and a secondary suite or carriage house on the same property, requiring a business license to operate, and then requiring a health and safety inspection and a good neighbor agreement to obtain a business license. So the open house was held on Zoom and was attended by approximately 36 people. So this included a presentation by staff, and then it was followed with a question and answer session. Most of the participation was through the chat function of Zoom, and the questions were then summarized and put in a question and answer sheet, which is included in Council's agenda package and was also shared on the short-term rental webpage. So most of the questions at the open house, for those that didn't attend, were centered around parking, licensing fees, good neighbor agreement, and what that entails, occupancy limits, and bylaw enforcement issues and capacity for undergoing the short-term rentals rollout. So written comments received were also included in Council's agenda package. So some people chose to provide written comments as a public submission, but the bulk of the written comments are from the open-ended question at the end of the survey, where 320 people wrote additional comments. And these are an important element of the survey. They represent a range of opinions, some objecting to short-term rentals, some commenting about the benefits of short-term rentals, or suggestions on what should or shouldn't be done as part of the program. Because of the range of opinions and the areas of focus, I didn't try to simplify them here in themes or, draw more attention to one comment than the other. And I think their value is just bringing a bit more depth to the survey. So I'm just inviting Council to review those comments on their own. So most of my presentation is about the statistical things that I could summarize based on the survey results. And the survey itself mostly focused on receiving feedback on specific aspects of the draft approach or the items that could be added or removed. And there was a good level of participation in the community. We had 547 completed surveys. And of those that participated, 88% identified themselves as full-time Summerland residents. 7% identified themselves as part-time residents, and just over 4% identified as not being a resident of Summerland. And 11.7% identified themselves as being an operator of a short-term rental. And just over half of all the participants identified themselves as living near a short-term rental. So participants were asked if they generally agree or disagree with allowing short-term rentals in Summerland, and 40% strongly agreed, 15% somewhat agreed. So overall, you had more people that were in agreement with allowing short-term rentals in general in Summerland than not. And as you can see, there are strong opinions on both sides, with 67% registering a strong opinion as either strongly agreeing or strongly disagreeing. So this kind of indicates that it is a divided issue. So as part of the survey, you're also asked about supporting allowing short-term rentals based on the zoning. So as you can see, more than half of the respondents agreed in allowing them in rural residential, commercial, agricultural, and urban residential zones. The strongest opinions were for the urban residential zones, where 64% were registering a strong opinion one way or the other. And as you can see, there's more categories that had a neutral response or no opinion, and that was the commercial zones had more people that were kind of neutral to whether or not to allow them in that area. I also asked about support based on dwelling type. So more than half of the respondents agreed with allowing short-term rentals in mobile homes, carriage houses, and secondary suites. For single detached dwellings, respondents were almost equally split in agreeing and disagreeing, with 48% agreeing and 47% disagreeing, and strong opinions on both sides. And you can see, with the exception of mobile homes, respondents registered strong opinions in agreement or disagreement on these dwelling types. And more than half disagreed with the use of duplex or multifamily units, such as townhouses and apartments for short-term rentals. So unlike the zoning question, the type of dwelling appears to be an important determinant, with some housing forms having more support than others. So we also asked about limiting occupancy. So just drafting regulations based on 6 persons being allowed without further consultation. So the most common response was an agreement with a 6-person limit, but there was a bit of a split in response, with 33% thinking that 6 was too many, and then 9% thinking that that was too few, and 11% thinking that there shouldn't be any limit at all. So it's almost a third as to which way you go there. There's also strong support for limiting the number of short-term rentals to 1 per property for properties that have a single detached dwelling and a secondary suite or carriage house. Very few disagreed with this limit, only 16%, and 50% strongly agreed, and another 17% somewhat agreed. So I also asked about support for allowing year-round operation of short-term rentals, meaning no limit on the number of days that you can rent as a short-term rental throughout the year. So more than half agreed with allowing for year-round operation, and 35% disagreed. This question also had a strong level of opinion, with 70% registering a strong opinion either for or against. Kind of a follow-up question to that was what we thought the most appropriate maximum number of days in a year was. So when asked this question, 40% thought up to 12 months was the most appropriate. So this shows that there's some tolerance for allowing for year-round, but 40% think that up to 12 months is the most appropriate response. There's also shown a range of opinions, with strong opinions on both sides. And the split of opinion on how many days per year a short-term rental can operate is very similar to the split that you get in the first question on the general support for short-term rentals. So 40% being in strong agreement, and 20% being in strong disagreement, and about 30% being somewhere in between. So the survey also asked whether the respondent agreed or disagreed with any property owner or tenant with the owner's permission being able to allowed to operate. Interestingly, 62% of respondents disagreed with this, And this indicates that respondents are either wanting another type of qualification to operate a short-term rental or disagree with allowing tenants to be able to operate. As more respondents agree with operators being off-site, then they agree with this question. Being on or off-site doesn't appear to be that qualification. And based on some of the written comments, there were some people that had strong opinions about allowing tenants to be able to rent. So participants were also asked if they agree or disagree with allowing operators to be off-site under specific conditions. So those conditions being if an operator was available 24/7, if they were responsive within 2 hours of a complaint, and if they had their contact information publicly displayed. So given those conditions, 53% agreed with allowing operators to be off-site. And most respondents had a strong opinion on this issue, but the majority agreed with allowing for off-site operators. So just to sum up some of the results so far, in comparing that to the draft regulations, most elements of the draft regulations had more support than opposition, or were the most popular response. And those elements are in bold. There's also some items in red that I wanted to highlight, where there was more opposition than support. So that was respondents being opposed to allowing short-term rentals in duplexes, townhouses, and apartment units, and allowing any property owner or tenant to be able to operate. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a split of opinion about the use of single-family dwellings, with slightly more in support than opposed, but not quite a majority. Just to make a correction, if you had sharp eyes in your agenda package, this pie chart was corrected from the original council package, and it shows strong support for a business license requirement for short-term rentals. So 74% agree with a business license requirement, with 63% strongly agreeing. And then we asked questions about application requirements for a business license. And through that, there was strong support for a parking plan, with 82% being in agreement of requiring a parking plan more than any other application requirement, followed by requiring a good neighbor agreement, a health and safety inspection, and then slightly less people in agreement, but still in agreement of requiring a health and safety checklist with random inspections. So there's preference for a health and safety inspection over random inspections and a checklist. And I also asked questions about business license terms and what we might require of an operator to get a business license. And there was a strong agreement for requiring 24/7 operator availability, a 2-hour response time, displaying contact information, additional on-site parking, including their business license number and any advertising. And then there's also 52% also agreed with an operator being on-site as a potential business license term. And as you can see from the chart, people were also registering strong opinions on these topics, but mostly strongly in support than any other of those previous questions. So respondents were then asked kind of a follow-up question as those same terms, asking whether that would be a reason not to renew a license if an operator was repeatedly not abiding by those terms. So similar agreement results, just slightly less in agreement than actually requiring those terms to begin with. So previously, I included a summary of the results compared with the draft approach. So this table summarizes some other requirements or permissions that weren't specified in that initial first draft approach. So there is support, for example, for allowing short-term rentals in agricultural zones with 51% in favor, but that's something that wasn't included in the original draft. There's also very strong support for requiring a parking plan with 82% in support of that. And there's also support for requiring those additional terms of the business license in terms of operator availability, contact information, and adequate response time. So there is also support for offsite operators, but also support to make it a requirement for the operator to be on site during a guest stay. So that kind of indicates that some of the concerns could be mitigated through the licensing terms based on how the survey question was asked. And then we did also just kind of give a broad overview in terms of concerns with potential impacts that short-term rentals are typically known to have. So most respondents are concerned about impacts of short-term rentals to housing availability of long-term housing, higher housing prices and rents, and the loss of neighborhood feel or character. There was less concern about the impact of they would have on traditional operators like hotels and motels. So compared to the rest of the survey results, there was one particular element that could address some potential impacts to housing while still aligning with the general support for allowing short-term rentals to occur. And this was limiting by dwelling type. So as I noted before, there was less support for allowing short-term rentals in duplex, townhouse, and apartment units than any other dwelling type. So that could be a way to pare back from the original approach. There were also some elements of the draft that were aimed to address neighborhood feel and character, which is also a concern. This includes limiting the number of short-term rentals on a single-family property and using a good neighbor agreement. One of the issues that came up as important in the survey results and in the open house was also parking. So requiring either a parking plan or additional parking could also help alleviate that impact to neighbors over the use of on-street parking within their neighborhoods. So the survey also identified other concerns that had potential impacts to direct neighbors. So 69% have concerns with large gatherings and parties, and of all of the concerns with potential impacts, that was the number one one that people were concerned about, followed by 67% having concerns about noise, and 58% having concerns about the use of on-street parking. So you can see here that these concerns are ranked higher than those of housing or of general neighborhood feel. There are some elements of that draft approach that are aimed at mitigating some of these issues and concerns of neighbors, namely limiting the total occupancy is a deterrent for large gatherings and parties, and requiring licensing terms that keep operators accountable is another. So this would include that round-the-clock availability of operators and specified standards for adequate responses to any issues that might arise, and also displaying contact information so that neighbors can try to resolve issues quickly and directly with the operator if they choose that approach. There's also an option of requiring additional parking or parking plan to, again, try to alleviate some of those parking concerns, but that wasn't included in those initial approach that we sent out to the public. So with that concludes the presentation on short-term rentals in terms of the public engagement results, and it's staff's recommendation that the report be received for information. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Another detailed report from you. Appreciate that. Questions for for staff? Okay, I saw Councillor Holmes' hand go up first, and then Councillor Carlson, and then Councillor Van Elfen. And Councillor Traynor, actually, sorry, before you go, Councillor Holmes, Councillor Traynor had asked during the presentation, so we'll just let her go in first.
On slide 19, says property owner or authorized tenant to operate a short-term rental. What does that mean exactly? 62% disagree with allowing a property owner to operate?
Yes. So that question was essentially whether you agreed or disagreed with allowing any property owner or tenant with the owner's permission to operate.
Okay. So people don't want the property owner operating a short-term rental on their own property? Am I missing something? Oh, subleasing. Is that what it means? Okay. Sorry, thank you for that.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. So my question is just regarding next steps. And, given the feedback that is pretty divided, do we just, where do we go from here? Do we just carry on with what the council resolution from last August and prepare bylaw amendments to that? Or how do we take the concerns that were raised and accommodate that?
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. So I will be doing another report to council, hopefully for the December 13th meeting, with the actual draft bylaws for council's consideration. So based on some of the comments, I believe that there will be tweaks to the bylaw to try to align with the survey results, but the overall results of the survey showed a general support for the approach taken with some modifications. But I also would invite informal feedback during this council meeting of any particular items that struck council.
Okay. Okay. Councillor Carlson?
I think my question was just answered. I just wanted to know if this is the time where are there opportunities to talk about what we might change within what we see as Penticton's bylaw that could become Summerland's. But I think that was answered.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question on the slide allowing short-term rentals by dwelling type. So apartments, townhouses, and duplexes, in a lot of those cases, they're stratas. We wouldn't have a say. The strata rules would apply there. Am I correct?
Yes, so the strata actually would have the ability to enforce and create their own strata rules as to whether or not that particular strata community wanted to have rentals, and they actually have more specific powers in terms of what they can actually prohibit from occurring there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Other questions? Oh, Brad, did you want to add something?
Well, yeah, I just want to clarify, thanks, Your Worship, Joanne's answer as well for you, Councillor Van Alphen, that they would still be required to still get our a license within, okay, I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that, okay.
Any other questions? Will someone bring forward a resolution then? Councillor Holmes.
No questions, but I wouldn't mind providing some informal feedback.
Just 1 second. Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. We'd really like that, actually. So if council's seeing themes here or has any initiating direction for us, it'd be helpful, because we will be moving into sort of some bylaw amendments, and we'd like to know we can hit it right the first time on December 13th. So certainly take that feedback now.
Great. I have a number of things written down as well. So let's start with you, Councillor Holmes.
Okay, so I guess the difficulty I have is what's being proposed doesn't really change anything. It just kind of legitimizes the status quo and creates more bureaucracy in doing it. I attended the open house, and there were a lot of operators on that call, and there were concerns raised there about the red tape that we were introducing. That, you know, they couldn't understand why a good neighborhood agreement would be required when we have a new good neighborhood bylaw. There was concerns about our capacity to do inspections. And one person asked the question, why are we doing this? Why are we even bothering? And I thought that was a pretty good question. and it wasn't really answered. You know, the person was just told that it's a council priority. So this has been a council priority for an awfully long time. I remember us first talking about it in 2015. And, you know, so maybe the reasons have been lost, but I think it's up to us to articulate why it's a priority and why we need to regulate. And I certainly, it's always been clear in my mind why we need to do it. And I think there are short-term rentals have created a lot of issues, and I just don't see them being addressed with the direction that we're going. And I really think we need to change directions to require a permanent resident to be present on site. And I'm happy to talk about the issues which I see that we need to address that aren't being addressed. But
Councillor Barkwell.
So the first thing I was thinking about was the limit of 6 people. That seems a little bit arbitrary. There can be places, I think, where 6 people would fit well. My limited involvement in short-term rentals was that there was often 3 generations that would come. One person's grandparents and a couple of adults and some children. So I was wondering if you could somehow relate the limit to the size of the facility, and also put a little bit of accommodation so that, say, a certain number of children wouldn't count towards that limit. That you could have children under 15 maybe, or 12 or something as an addition that wouldn't hit your cap. Because you could have some adults and 3 children and be 7 people. And you know, but the children would be together in one room or something like that. And so if I keep the floor for one other comment, if we require the owner of the property to be on site, that basically limits all short-term rentals to places that have carriages and carriage houses and suites. Is that your understanding? Everyone's, am I understanding it correctly? Yeah. There's no other option, I guess, right?
Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have to concur with Councillor Holmes. That's my biggest concern, and it always has been. You know, I cannot see putting up a sign with a phone number on it for neighbors to call. You know, if the person doesn't live on site, that person lives in Calgary, and they're using their place as a short-term rental, what's he gonna do when you phone him in Calgary? Or even if he picks up his phone? You know, so if the owner lives on site and there's an issue, at least it can be addressed. You know, that's my thought about this, you know, that they have to live on site to run their business. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. I think I find myself agreeing, and I do think asking that question is, why is this a priority and what is it that we are trying to do, is important. When you look at the actual people who participated in the survey, I mean, the majority of people who actually are short-term rental operators, they live in Summerland permanently, and I believe that those people are likely the ones that have suites or that have carriage homes or that rent their whole house but live in the carriage. You know, there's options there, and I believe that by having more conversation around that, you know, there may be a percentage of the folks, 10%, 15%, who are either part-time or non-residents who might be impacted by a decision like this, but the majority, I do think, would be able to continue doing what they're doing anyways.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, thank you. You know, increasingly people are purchasing houses for the sole purpose of renting them to tourists. There's companies, property management companies that are buying houses for the sole purpose of renting them on short-term rentals. There, in the States, there's these timeshare companies where you can purchase like a 1/16 of a house and you get 1 or 2 weeks in houses in residential areas. So these are businesses. This is a business model, and they're operating in areas where zoning doesn't allow business operations. It's no different than putting I don't know, an auto body shop or a body rub shop in the middle of a residential area. And you know, and we've had a motel operator come to us asking to rezone and subdivide their property so that they can rent as a long-term rentals. And so, you know, we're looking at a situation where we've got our own residences being pushed out into living in motels on a long-term basis in a commercial area, while the tourists are staying in houses in residential areas. And it's all upside down as far as I'm concerned. And I really think, you know, I just asked myself, would I want a short-term rental with no permanent resident on site right next door to me? And no, I don't think I would. I think if we were all honest, none of us would want that. And you know, most municipalities, they've brought regulations in for short-term rentals years ago, like 5 years ago at least. And since then, many of these municipalities have overhauled their regulations. And the ones that were first brought in was this most permissive approach. It just wasn't working for them. And so I don't really understand why we want to start where all those municipalities started 5 years ago. The advantage of coming to the party late ought to be that we can avoid bringing in those kind of regulations that have been shown not to really work. And I really encourage us, and I mentioned this last time, that we look at the district of Tofino, who've gone around the blocks a few times on this, and they have their short-term rental regulations. It's only permitted on a lot that contains 2 dwelling units, and only one of the 2 dwelling units can be used as a short-term rental, and the other dwelling unit must be occupied by a permanent resident. And Tofino has more than 250 short-term rentals with those regulations. And so I'd hardly say that their tourism sector is suffering, you know? So I'd even be okay with people renting out a single room in their house. That was kind of the original idea of Airbnb in the first place. And you know, if the permanent resident's on site, we have lots of empty nesters in town, retirees on fixed income who live in houses where they have more space than they could possibly use. And so let them rent out a room. You know, I'd be okay with that as well. But I think, I really think we need to change our direction here. That's just my feeling. Thanks.
I have a few thoughts and questions. Looking at, well, tonight we're going to be seeing the October numbers for bylaw enforcement and development related activities. You can see on there that we've only had the Good Neighbor bylaw for the 1 year, but by far and away, it's the highest reason a bylaw officer is called out, according to the chart. Do you know how many of these call-outs are related to concerns about short-term rentals?
Thanks, Your Worship, for the question. I don't know that information offhand. Sorry, I didn't have the breakdown of the total number of complaints and for what areas of the Good Neighbor bylaw, but it would deal with noise as an example, which could be related to a short-term rental. Was included in that bylaw. Same with untidy and unsightly properties as well. And we are getting complaints, a lot of complaints for those type of properties as well within the community. So I'm not too sure the breakdown, but could be some.
Okay, thanks. And another question about the enforcement or bylaws. The work that the bylaw officer does is are parking complaints part of the traffic? Yeah, they are.
Yeah, Your Worship. Yeah, it would be, yes, if it's a parking issue that's within a road right away, that within a community, then we would be dealing with through the traffic bylaw.
Okay, thank you. There are a number of concerns in the, I guess, additional feedback section of our agenda that talk about the impact of short-term rentals on long-term rentals in Summerland. Do you know if there's any data that actually shows the impact?
I don't have any specific data. One of the comments about short-term rentals is that it's not a completely direct relationship of one short-term rental equals one long-term rental being taken away from the market. It's a bit more complex than that, because there's some people that would rent short-term that would not rent out to a long-term tenant, whether that's somebody that wants flexibility of using their unit for their own personal guests for part of the year, or if they're renting out, say their summer home, but they still want to have access to it. Without having a program where we are aware of how many short-term rentals are on the market, we're kind of a bit blind in terms of how many short-term rentals are actually operating and specifically where they're operating and what type of housing they're using. So I don't know if Mr. Delvit wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure either, but in response, I do want to kind of indicate to council what we're thinking at the staff level in terms of draft regulations based on that feedback of housing supply being of concern and the loss of long-term rentals. Definitely, Joanne presented the different types of dwelling types that people support. A short-term rental being located within within either a carriage house, a secondary suite, or a duplex or apartment housing unit. And based on the feedback, definitely the more multifamily type dwelling unit that we have a limited amount of supply for the long-term rental market should be protected. And so that was one tweak that Joanne referenced that we were going to suggest to council making come December 13th is we potentially limit short-term rentals within higher density or in medium density type dwelling units. So that'd be townhouses, duplexes and apartment dwellings. That makes sense.
Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to say, in regards to the concern about do these short-term rentals take things off the market, we're, in a time where we need housing ownership. Some of the short-term rental owners, we do know anecdotally, they're going into the short-term rental market in order to afford their home. So it's actually supporting their affordability for themselves in terms of a mortgage helper by allowing them to have a room or two, or in some cases a carriage house out back or whatever, in order to allow them to make the mortgage they otherwise would be challenged to make. So I just wanted to say that as well. It's not always a removal from the marketplace of that home for rental, but sometimes actually fostering home ownership by some individuals.
But couldn't they achieve the same result by doing a long-term rental of their carriage house as far as a mortgage helper?
It depends on the case-by-case scenario, right? For each individual family and the amount of space that they've got there available. Sometimes long-term rentals are also looking for larger spaces for their own families and as well.
Right. I'll go to you in just a moment, Councillor Van Alphen. I also have some concerns about absentee owners. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I definitely have some concerns about that. And I think that I think this regulation, I know that there's some pushback from certain people in the community, perhaps ones that are already running multiple short-term rentals, I'm not really sure. But I think that short-term rentals, because they are creating revenue and that they should have a business license, I think that goes without, for me, that goes without question. I think if we're going to be requiring a business license of bed and breakfasts or other forms of accommodation, we need to have the same thing apply to short-term rental units. Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, long-term versus short-term. Short-term rentals, usually the cost of short-term is much higher than a long-term. So the owner of the home makes a lot more money. Plus, with a long-term rental, now you're dealing with the Rentals Act, and it's possibly difficult to get rid of a renter if it doesn't work out. Short-term rentals, people come and go. Long-term rentals, like you could be stuck with a tenant that you don't really want. And it could be, it takes a long time, maybe. So I think that's a lot of reasons why people have gone to the short-term rentals, because then they don't have that issue.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Great work on the survey. I think what we have to be very cognizant of is if we overregulate. As soon as we overregulate, we're going to drive that we're going to do an underground market, and it's going to be exactly where we're sitting with illegal secondary suites right now. And I think that, do I agree that the owner should be in the home? I do, but that's my personal opinion. I would never want to leave my house to somebody else. That investment is just too large for me. I don't have that comfort level. But I think if we try to overregulate, again, I think that we're going to push people away, and we're not going to see the success rate in trying to get the licensing that we're trying to achieve here. And I understand where Councillor Holmes is coming from, but on the other hand, we're not the only municipality that has this. I know people that have secondary suites, or I'm sorry, vacation rentals in their secondary suites. It's not a legal secondary suite, but it's a vacation rental. So should we have licenses? Absolutely, we should. Should there be is the person accountable? Absolutely, they should be accountable. But I think once we overregulate, I believe that we're just going to defeat any of our goodwill that we're trying to put out there to legalize or legitimize these forms of rentals. And we're going to do ourselves or do the municipality more harm by driving it underground than actually having people come forward and saying, I have one, I want to make it, I want to legalize it as an entity for my short-term rental. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barkwell.
After listening to the discussion for a while, I think there's two things that have resonated with me, and that's that would you want to have a short-term rental in the house next to you? And almost invariably the answer is no. And people who live on streets that have a lot of short-term rentals have said they don't like it to me. And the other thing that's resonated is we want to deal with that, but we don't want to overregulate. I agree with Councillor Patton a lot there. And I think we can accomplish almost 90% of what our objective is here by requiring that the resident lives on the property. Then the idea of going to the neighbors and getting good neighbor agreements and stuff like that, that doesn't seem necessary at all. Seems like extra work, and there could be other things that were on the list that really we could do away with once we have that person living on the property.
Councillor Holmes and then Councillor Traynor.
Yeah, the amount of regulation doesn't really depend on the model that you have. You could have, what you allow and what you don't allow. The regulations, how much you regulate is kind of separate to that. And so I kind of agree with what Councillor Barkwell just said. Yeah, I agree. We don't need that much regulation, but in a way, if you say that secondary suites and carriage houses are this is an allowable use for those things, if any, that could help legitimize those uses if they're what's the word I'm looking for? Illegal. If they're illegal suites, right? And then if somebody says, okay, well, I can, if I legitimize that, then I can get a license to I'm stumbling over my words, but you know what I mean. Thanks.
Councillor Traynor.
Yeah, I've given a lot of thought to this one because whenever I go away, I use Airbnb, and I would say half of the time the owner is on site, and the other half it's some kind of rental company or something. So I've kind of experienced both. So I have the perspective of being a customer, but now in this situation, I kind of am taking a different approach. And so I think when we're thinking about doing this in our own community, I think that we need to put the people who live full-time in our neighborhoods first when we're thinking about this bylaw. So like our residents, because first and foremost, the areas that we're talking about are residential areas, they're not commercial. And so I think by having someone on site, whether it's the owner or whatever, I think that that would definitely help address any potential issues. And then also it gives consistency in the neighborhood. So all of the neighbors continue to know each other. And I think that that's really important. It's kind of odd if you have a house next to you or down the street where it's just like rotating all summer long. And in Trout Creek, we have a couple of those houses. And, you know, I walk by and every week there's somebody new there. And so I think that if the owner's there as well, then at least, you know, you see a familiar face and that helps contribute to the neighborhood feel. I also think that it allows neighbors, well, first of all, there's probably would be fewer issues because if the homeowner's there, then there's not going to be rowdy parties. But it also, if the neighbors are having issues, they can talk to the owner directly about it. If the owners aren't there and you know, the neighbor has to make a bylaw complaint or phone the police, there's this delay and then frustration builds. So I think that having the owner there would definitely would help keep the feeling of our neighborhoods the way that we all like them to be.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, and for the record, I've stayed in short-term rentals as well. And in fact, last summer, I stayed in a short-term rental, our family, in Tofino. And it was interesting because the owner lived in the secondary suite and she rented the main house as the Airbnb. But that works too because she's still there, right? And she's still, you know, responsible. So, you know, it's not. It doesn't mean you can't have small. You can only have small places if you use this approach. Thanks.
Councillor Van Alphen.
But I agree with Councillor Patton, and more regulation, we're going to drive people underground, which is going to cause a whole bunch more work for our bylaw. You know, that's one thing. Number two is how do we address billets and or students? A lot of people are taking in foreign students through the school district. And a lot of people, myself included, years ago, took in hockey billets. I mean, I'm out in the farm in Garnet Valley, so I mean, I know I'm not disturbing my neighbors, but, you know, in other situations, it is in town. So does that also?
I don't know for sure, but I don't think so because the definition of short-term rentals has a limit on the number of days.
True, sorry. I thank you for the clarification, yeah.
Brad.
Yeah, you're correct, Your Worship, and also just to also add to the answer, we probably would only enforce those that have been advertising publicly on the various Airbnb websites. Like that's going to be our primary mechanism to drive these people in to get licenses, is through catching people through the advertising.
So are we going to be able to assure people that want to be legitimate, that when they come in, we're going to be basically looking at health and safety and parking instead of, you know, re-renovating their whole home because the, you know, the building inspector doesn't like the color, or, you know what I mean? You know, I'm not, so we don't pick things apart and we're only looking at the health and safety concerns, you know, just so people will come in. Gotta, you know, we don't want to drive them away.
Maybe I'll take this one, and maybe if Joanne wants to add to it, if there's anything, because I know she helped develop kind of our process. Well, she actually developed the process for us internally, and talking with our building officials, and also Dan Meyer, our bylaw enforcement officer. We did talk about requiring a health and safety inspection as a pared down inspection, only looking at health and safety elements. Actually, in looking at comparisons, because we are kind of late to the game here, the city of Penticton has a great checklist for health and safety inspections, and they actually advertise specifically what they're looking at for each element of fire and life safety as they're walking through a property. So the licensee or the owner, before they even apply, know what we're going to be looking at as we go through that health and safety check. So that's what we'd like to follow for our inspections.
Okay, other comments or questions? Councillor Van Elfen.
Is it appropriate to bring the resolution forward, Madam Mayor?
Sure, if there are no other questions, we can certainly continue on the discussion. Brad?
I saw Councillor Holmes had his. Anyways, I do want to clarify with council before, just because we are going to be preparing bylaw amendments. So I did have one question back to council on the permanent residency desire of someone living within the home. A lot of our short-term rentals, I think, currently in town here are single-family dwellings that are temporarily put on Airbnb. So they're still permanent residents, like the definition of permanent resident, but they're not there full-time. So I guess my clarification question back to council is, do you want to require full-time residency at all times, or is it just permanent residency to be a requirement? And any kind of indication would be good to hear. Thank you.
Councillor Barkwell and then Councillor Van Elfen.
I think I know what you're talking about. I know people when Iron Man was on, they would lock up a few things in their house and they'd rent their whole house to strangers for 10 days or whatever it was for an exorbitant amount of money. Do we want to go after those people, and how do we distinguish that person from the person who's regularly, do you give people 2 weeks a year that they can rent out their house and not be in it or something? I am not sure how you would structure that regulation and whether it's necessary to accommodate that. If they go on their own holidays, they rent out their house and it helps pay for their holiday, things like that. It happens. Yeah.
Councillor Van Elfen and then Holmes.
That's a really good question, because I know there's situations out there that I can put my house on the internet and trade with somebody in Europe, go to their home for 2 weeks, they come to my home for 2 weeks, and we just trade homes type idea. So yeah, that's an interesting, but it's not like it's really an Airbnb then, I guess. But yeah, I'm confused on that one. I'd like to hear more.
Councillor Holmes?
Yeah, I don't see those as an area of concern. I don't even see why we have to get into regulating that at all. Let it be. It happens, and it's people's homes. It's not. They're not running a business per se. It's not a business operation. So I think it's the business, short-term rental business that we need to regulate. Thanks.
Does that give you some guidance, Brad?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Councillor Holmes.
I was just wondering if the resolution needs to include a change of direction.
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Holmes, there has been a lot of ideas posed by council. I've been taking notes. I bet you Joanna has as well. Primarily, we wanted to share the results of the feedback we got tonight and get a kind of informal sense of where council would like to see us move forward, which we did get that from council tonight. So thank you. I don't know if we really need a formal resolution, although you're free to provide one.
So currently, the resolution is to receive the report for information, and we do know that there will be a draft coming back with the discussions that we've had tonight and from the survey on December 13th. Personally, I think that is enough. Yes? Councillor Holmes?
You know, so the resolution, I believe staff is still would still be working with would be our August one, which directs staff to draft a regulatory framework based on the permissive modeled after City Penticton. And I just for the sake of clarity, I would like to bring forward a motion to ask staff to draft a regulatory framework based on a long-term residential, based on the requirement that permanent residents be present on site.
Okay, that's the resolution I'd like to bring forward
And receive for information.
yes, and receive information. Seconder for that? Councillor Carlson? For the discussion?
Okay, so if we have that in black and white that the permanent resident has to be on site, do we tacitly just turning a blind eye to the 1 week rental, the 2 week rental that we just finished talking about? Or do we have to put something further into the regulations, some definitions or something like that? Or should I just leave that for staff to think about for a while and come up with an answer in a few weeks?
Well, what about the suggestion that it be a permanent resident, and then that takes that kind of, widens the scope there without us having to regulate or enforce? I mean, given the example that you gave, which is a really good example. And then the person does live here full-time. The example that you gave, Councillor Van Alphen too, does live here full-time, so they're a permanent resident in Summerland, but these are just kind of different circumstances, and it's not being run as a short-term rental business.
See, that's different than the wording of being on site, which was in the
Yes.
resolution, yeah.
Would you,
Well, no, I'll leave my motion the way it is. I'm sure staff can figure something out in terms of exceptions for events or whatever, homes exchanges. I don't know. It's if you take off to be present on site, then it doesn't really solve what we're trying to solve. That's if you're just. My son is a permanent resident of Summerland, and he hasn't been here for for a year. So,
Councillor Barkwill?
Yes, I agree with Councillor Holmes that we need to keep the on-site part of it. I'm just asking that staff can maybe put their mind to how we can accommodate the exceptions that we just spoke to.
Thoughts? Oh, I'll go to Councillor Patton first and then ask for your thoughts, Brad.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Perhaps that we put a time limit in, say 90 days a year or something, if you are a non-permanent resident or a permanent resident that wants to enter into this, that you are limited to X amount of days per year, where if you're an owner living within the unit, that then you can go for 12 months a year. But maybe we have to just look at some different guidelines in regards to how we deal with the permanent resident that wants to, maybe requires the income helper compared to the person that's doing a senior that's got their, has a unit that they're using as a short-term rental. I think there's something that we can work out that might work out good for both worlds. Thanks.
Councillor Trainer?
I think the confusion is around the term permanent resident. Like I think what was your motion again, Councillor Holmes? Did you use the word permanent resident or on-site? What happens if we had like operator on-site? Like I just don't know if or does it matter? I don't know.
Councillor Carlson?
I think using the term operator is not a very good one because the people who operate these as businesses that aren't living in this community would then have someone operate 6 of these on, and they would be around. I don't think the word operator should be used. But I think the person that either lives in that home or owns that home needs to be the permanent resident, not an operator.
Councillor Holmes?
Yeah, I think we're overthinking this a little bit. When we go away on a holiday or something, we get somebody to stay in our house because we have a cat that needs to be fed. So is that person, they're just looking after my place, right?
But that's not a short-term rental, though.
Well, no, it could be.
And that's what we're talking about
Well,
here.
it could be. Well, that's
A
what I'm saying.
bylaw.
That's what I'm saying. I think we're overthinking this. And you could argue that having somebody stay in your place at Ironman isn't necessarily a short-term rental either. It depends how you define it. And I would just say, just look at Tofino's bylaw and see what they have. And I think that's a good guide. So.
Could you reread the motion that's on the floor? Please, Kendra.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So it's that council directs staff to draft a short-term regulatory framework based on the requirement of having a permanent resident on site. One thing I would like to note was that there was a second part to that August 23rd motion that read that council directs staff to initiate the public engagement strategy on short-term rentals to receive feedback on the draft regulatory framework and to identify any additional priorities tailored to the District of Summerland context. So having this come up through that comment, I would say would be a tailor to, the Penticton framework that could also encompass all of this as well.
So the second part is just to receive the report for information? Yeah. Yes. Yes, no, I'm talking about the motion that you put forward tonight. And that was seconded by Councillor Carlson. Okay, is there any further discussion? I'd just like to say that given the depth of the information that we received from Brad's department, from Joanne and Brad himself, the last time this was before council, what we saw in the open house and tonight's presentation, I think that they probably have all of the guidance that they need, and we're just doing a draft bylaw, and if it's not right, I mean, it comes back to us in a short period of time anyway. So that's my thought on this. I don't think that we need that extra guidance, so I'm going to be voting against the resolution. Yeah. Any further comments or discussion? All in favor? Opposed? So Councillor Patton and I are opposed. That is carried. Now 9.3, Development Services Monthly Update. And this is for Brad. Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks, Your Worship. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm back before council with my regular monthly update on activities and statistics from the Development Services Department. First slide here is our planning applications stats for the year to date for the month ending on October 31st. We saw a slowdown in October for the number of development variance permits applied for. But we have received a number of additional applications for subdivisions and rezonings, and also form and character DPs. Just a couple examples. We've had some recent development permit applications for new downtown redevelopment projects, so that was encouraging to see, and because this is the downtown is definitely an area where we want to encourage new growth and renewal. And those applications will be coming forward to council in the near future at a future council meeting. Next slide. For construction value for the building permits, we've got a year to date now of over $54 million, and that is now double the construction value that we experienced for all of 2020, which was 27 million. And also looking at the number of permits issued for year to date, we've got 174 issued year to date versus 149. So you can see from these stats that our building inspection staff are also busier this year, but I'm happy to report that we're maintaining our targeted time frame of 3 weeks. So they're working very efficiently with the number of files coming in. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. For the month of October, we received a total of 49 complaint files, bringing the yearly total to 891. As the mayor mentioned earlier, this was the first month we actually surpassed the number of complaints for the traffic bylaw being now directed more so to the Good Neighbor bylaw, our new bylaw that we put into force in July. This could be a result, though, of a decrease in the amount of tourism traffic that we're seeing within the community, and that decrease in the number of complaints for the traffic bylaw as we moved from September to October. Next slide. And for year-to-date complaint files, you can see from this slide, although it's very small on the screen, I apologize, that we've seen a record number of growth in traffic bylaw complaints being submitted in comparison to previous years of 2020 and 2019. Definitely the majority of our complaints are coming in under traffic. And we're up to a total of 346 complaints now specific to that bylaw for this year. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions on my presentation, and if there's any specific application-oriented questions, I'm happy to take those as well.
Councillor Van Alphen and then Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. On your year-to-date complaints submitted, irrigation reeds, is that agricultural?
Yeah. Through your worship to Councillor Van Alphen, yeah, this is actually the reason why you don't see it on here. It's actually, let me see here. It could have been related to the that heat dome event we had where we were under the stage 2 restrictions, and the number of complaints that we were receiving at the time from neighbors that were observing their other neighbors not following the restrictions. So that generated more bylaw enforcement complaints. We didn't have an event like that in 2020 or 2019, so that's the reason why those came forward.
Councillor Holmes?
Thank you. Just for the traffic bylaw complaints, are there any particular types that that are more common than others, and you know, it's yeah, just that. Thanks.
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Holmes, yes, there has been, I think, an uptick, I would say more in parking violations than years past. We've gotten certain areas that are become problem areas, I would say, in the community due to parking. One in particular is probably, I would say, Lakeshore Drive in the tourist season. It gets pretty bunched up down there in Lower Town. So we've had a number of complaints issued in that area.
Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know one that our bylaw enforcement officer raised with me as well, Brad might recall too, is during the summer, a fair number of instances of non-compliance, particularly in parking of travel trailers, and then leaving travel trailers on the street unhooked up to vehicles. And I think in the past, you know, in times of shortage from a staff capacity perspective, probably wasn't on the top priority list, but Dan's been able to really plow through some of those backlogs and been able to deal a lot with that issue, which is a safety issue, fire access and all that. And we've been able to focus on that. And there's a bit of a blitz that occurred there.
Councillor Van Elfen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question through our Director of Planning. Are we still utilizing the other gentleman half-time?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Van Alphen, yes and no, I guess is probably the right answer. We do have it in the budget. However, last year we kind of ramped up that individual earlier in the year. We had more opportunity for that individual to work more hours earlier in the year, and also stretching into the summer. And so because of that, in order to maintain our budget, we restricted the number of hours moving into the fall. So that reason, he hasn't been working as many hours in the bylaw area because of that. Come January 1st next year, we expect that to revert back to more standard schedule for the full year for that individual, but it's still there.
You have a follow-up?
If I may, Madam Mayor, just a compliment through to you guys. I've had lots of dealings with him last summer. Early Sunday mornings, setting up farmers markets, and he was out and about visiting some people that utilize our park overnight and different things like that. And I was so impressed with his demeanor. You know, he's pretty calm and kind. And he was over talking to some transient people in the park and telling them about the vaccination tent at the farmer's market and things like that. And I just thought, you know, kudos to him and kudos to yourself and to all your staff. I just was impressed with the gentleman. Thank you.
Nice. Councillor Barkwell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was wondering about what sort of a complaint would concern business license bylaw. And there's that category on the monthly, but I don't see that category in the year-to-date complaints.
Through your worship to Councillor Barkle, good eye. On reading them charts, that's correct. We had it as a complaint within our tracking system last year, and we actually had a lot of files generated in the months of October and November, primarily because we wanted to re-engage all of the businesses to ensure whether our renewal list was accurate, and it hadn't been updated in a number of years. Before we wanted to issue new renewals for the 2021 year, our bylaw enforcement officer went to every business in town to ask if they are still operating a business, if it was uncertain, to create a correct list for business license renewals. So at that point in time, every file that was generated was considered a complaint file within our stats. So that's why you see it in the month to month, because it was a workload for that bylaw enforcement officer. However, I removed it from the year-to-date stats because I don't consider it a complaint.
Just have a comment, and that is, this is for council's information. The question came up at our meeting this morning with School District 67 about, well, obviously we're talking about student numbers and enrollment numbers and things like that. And the question came up, well, what is the district doing in terms of development and making sure that there are houses available for people that might be moving into the area? This followed on a comment that Summerland's demographic is really fairly rapidly changing from primarily, 65 and over to, 19 to 34 or 14 to 34 or something. So all of the young families, and they wanted to have some idea about that. They were really pleased to hear, as CAO Stat mentioned, that we've doubled the construction value from last year, and we're not at the end of the year yet. So they were very pleased to hear that. And just again, for council's information, once we get the digital, did you get the digital copy yet? Yeah. Then that will be shared with council tomorrow probably, and a little bit more update on what it was that we discussed at the meeting today. Okay, so that's great. You're a busy guy. Busy department. Yeah. Okay, could I have someone bring, Councillor Van Elfen?
Bring the resolution forward that the October 2021 Development Services Monthly Report be received for information.
Thank you. Seconder is Councillor Barkwell. All in favor? Great, thank you. And then on to the first of our late items, 9.4. This is for Kendra to talk about having our meeting and public hearing on December the 13th elsewhere.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in anticipation of a public turnout for the public hearing for the rezoning in front of the Lakeshore Rackets Club, staff is proposing to have both the public hearing on December 13th and the evening council meeting at the Arena Banquet Rooms. That would be 8820 Jubilee Road. In having this meeting offsite, there are a few implications. The meeting will be limited to in-person attendance and participation. The meetings will be live streamed and recorded. However, we don't have the capabilities of offering the Zoom option. And in accordance with our council procedure bylaw, all council meetings must take place within Municipal Hall and by electronic means unless there is a resolution from council. So staff is recommending the following resolution, that the December 13th, 2021 public hearing and regular evening council meeting be held at 8220 Jubilee Road, Summerland Arena Banquet Room.
Thank you. And we have two public hearings that night, right? Okay. Seconded by Councillor Van Elfen. Any discussion on this? Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if the objective is to maximize participation, and a lot of people today still prefer to Zoom in, and so if we're taking that option away from people, are we actually maximizing participation, or are we limiting participation? That's my big question, and I don't have an answer for it, but it's a concern of mine. Thanks.
Councillor Barkwell.
I have an answer. I think we are.
So that means there isn't a concern? Is that what you're saying?
I think we are maximizing it.
We are maximizing.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further thoughts or discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. And then our second late item, 11.1, the coming out of this morning's meeting, and I'll pass this over to Kendra.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So to follow the committee of the whole meeting this morning and just to have a formal council resolution for the preferred site selection, the recommendation would be that council confirm 9600 Brown Street and 13609 Dixon Avenue as the preferred sites for the primary healthcare center feasibility study.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Carlson. Further discussion? Councillor Van Alphen.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I know Brown Street, but Dixon Avenue, can you, I apologize, I could not make this morning's meeting.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So that's the one that is in between Jubilee and Quinpool. And
The
it's an
Legion
existing,
Village?
yes, Legion Village, the existing seniors center there.
Thank you for the
Seniors,
clarification.
Residents.
Thanks.
Any other? All good then? All in favor? Great. Okay. Any notice of motion tonight? Okay. No correspondence, no committee or commission minutes. Councillor reports. Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one thing to report at the KVR meeting this week. The Christmas trains will not be running this year due to COVID, so which is kind of a bummer, but hopefully things can get back on track next year again. And,
So to speak.
I'm sorry.
So to speak, on track. Yeah.
So on track, so to speak. No pun intended. Anyway, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Last week there was a library board meeting, which was just business as usual with the library. On Saturday, the Summerland Library hosted a conversation at the end of, or the midway point of the Unbox project, and I know they still have a few boxes left, so if you're interested in going and participating in this project and learning a little bit more about not only racism and allyship and privilege, but also a little bit about yourself, I would highly recommend just going over to the library tomorrow and seeing if Caroline has any of these boxes left. It was quite interesting to participate in, and also to be part of the conversation and be in a room with Summerlanders who really are trying their best and doing everything they can to try and make our community open to everyone and safe and respectful and all of the things that we would like to see in this community. So if you haven't heard about it up until this moment, I would highly recommend you go and find out more. It's a project in collaboration with South Okanagan Immigrant Services. And so they were actually the ones that led the conversation on Saturday, and it was very well received. So that'll be my report. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was fortunate enough to attend the Aquatic Center open house at our arena banquet room, and I thought it was really well done. I thought Lori did a fabulous job, and the consultants. It was very informative. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of people there. I was hoping to see bigger crowds, but most people I spoke to were pretty enthusiastic. Councillor Carlson was there, and we had an opportunity to chat with some of our residents, and yeah, I was pretty impressed. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councillor Traynor. Could you just use your mic, please?
I'm tired. I'm not even thinking about the bedtimes that I have to do when I get home. Anyhow, on Thursday I attended RDOS, and then we had a budget meeting on Friday, and then we have 2 more meetings coming up this week after our council budget meeting. So it's going to be quite busy, and that's all I have.
Okay, Councillor Barkwell.
Nobody's invited me to any meetings this last 2 weeks.
I'd be happy to share some with you. Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have the RDOS report from last Thursday. Hopefully get it written this week sometime between meetings. I attended the late session of the rec center open house last week, and there were even fewer people than the earlier session. And I think that does show that people are still a little bit hesitant in going out in public and in public meetings. But the people who were there asked some really good questions and provided some really good feedback. And I agree, it was really well done, really good presentation, and it certainly helped me visualize better what it all might look like in the end. You know, and I think we're really getting there. So it was exciting. Thanks.
Good. All right. Anyone on the line? No. Okay. Adjournment, please. Councillor Van Elfen and Carlson